evening all. Today we have with us Dr. Prithvi from Bangalore. So he's a sports physiotherapist and I'm happy to say that he was my 1 year junior in Masters in GNDU. Really happy to have you here with us to share your knowledge and your experience. And you've chosen a wonderful topic and we're all looking forward to hear from you, Dr. Prithvi. Please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Ernest. And Dr. Ernest has always been my big brother and source of inspiration for me since my GNDU days. And I really thank him for this opportunity. Okay, I've been into musculoskeletal practice since the last 10 to 15 years. And there have been many a times when we've all kind of hit the dead end or the roadblock, and we have tried to figure out as to what could be the next big thing that should enable us to practice in a way that we all wish to practice. And this quest for finding out newer aspects or advances in musculoskeletal practice has probably led me to different places, and over a period of time I've been able to appreciate the change that is imminent, or the change that is going to take our practice to the next level. So I just want to share a few of those thoughts, which will definitely add value to your practice as a musculoskeletal physiotherapy practitioner. Next. Now, there are two important issues that we face as musculoskeletal practitioners or musculoskeletal physiotherapists. And over the years, what we have noticed is, though the science of musculoskeletal practice has evolved, where there are very new methods of procedures available to fix many of the problems related to trauma. The treatment of atraumatic musculoskeletal pain conditions has been the greatest of the challenge for all the concerned people, and that has led to two things that I would wish to highlight. The first one being too much of medicine. Now, what does too much of medicine here means is like making an overdiagnosis, making a misdiagnosis, counting on false positives, and maybe we could put it as diagnostic over medicalization, and which could lead to over detection. And all of these things can ultimately result in over treatment, over utilization of the healthcare resources, and interventional over medicalization, which not necessarily is good care but can result in low value care. Next. The second thing, apart from too much medicine, is the medicalizing of normality. Now, what does it mean, medicalizing of normality? So it is like creating health concerns where none exist, and you are trying to treat something of a clinical illusion or a hypothetical condition which actually does not exist, which in other words, you are trying, normal human function is being labeled as abnormal. Next. Things in perspective from the point of view of physiotherapy, let us understand situations like atraumatic medial meniscal tears, arthroscopic debridement of for knee osteoarthritis, type 2 superior labral tears of, that is the slap lesions, bicipital tendinosis for long head of biceps pathology, acromioplasty for subacromial impingement. Now, there is no evidence which suggests that a surgical procedure can offer a better outcome in the following atraumatic musculoskeletal conditions. But nevertheless, the surgeons are operating this from time immemorial and continue to do so despite the lack of clear evidence. And as physios, somehow we have not developed the attitude to seek for evidence, which is only favoring a graded exercise program in most of these conditions can give outcomes which are not any inferior to the outcomes achieved by surgery. So this is one area for all of us to think about. Next. Next. And it is not just the surgeons who are to be blamed. Even as practitioners of physiotherapy, we are doing many different interventions for pain in isolation, like acupuncture, manual therapy, myofascial, trigger point therapy, and some of the injections that are being used locally, and pharmacological interventions in terms of opioids or NSAIDs, all of which is being used in isolation with the hope of fixing one's pain. Next. Next. So from the point of physiotherapy, what does medicalizing normality means? Now, all of us have been taught in our undergrad physiotherapy education about posture and the importance of an ideal posture and the ways and means of measuring an ideal posture. So postural variations of normal people are considered as abnormal unless there is a gross postural change resulting in fixed deformities, as in case of an ankylosing spondylitis, or as in case of an advanced kyphosis or an advanced scoliosis, where the symptoms can be related to the posture. We cannot conclusively say that the pain that we are supposedly treating is emanating from posture. By just mere static measurement of posture, we cannot conclude that the pain experienced during dynamic activities, functional or sporting, can be attributed to the postural abnormalities. So there is nothing called as an ideal posture which is common for everyone. Postural variations are the norm, and we cannot make it an abnormality in itself. And if we do so, that is what it means to say that we are medicalizing a normality. Imaging is the next big thing where this phenomenon of medicalizing normality happens, and it happens to an unprecedented scale. Anybody who is over and above 30 years of age to 40 years, if you were to take an MRI, it can definitely show lumbar disc protrusion, disc bulges. There can be changes in the facet joints, spondylolisthesis, and these people may not absolutely have any symptom at all. So how can we just make these findings on the MRI as a pathological condition? So this is the tendency towards medicalizing normality in terms of our own assessment of static posture assessments, or in terms of the imaging studies that or investigations that we use, where many a times just by mere seeing an osteophyte on a radiograph does not mean that the person is having a pain in the knee or it has to be treated. He may be absolutely asymptomatic, and that osteophytes is just a body's own way of probably stabilizing the knee joint. Next. Next, please. So what is that which is driving this too much of medicine, or why are we getting into the habit of medicalizing normality? Now, who are to be blamed? What is the role of each of the stakeholders? Now, the first and foremost reason, as I can think of, is the belief system that all of us have been, all of us have developed because of our own training, because of our past conditioning, or because of our complacency in not updating ourselves with the current evidence that we need to follow or use in our clinical practice. So this belief of the clinician and patients are the primary drivers of this too much of medicine that is happening. And it is also the belief that doing something is better than waiting and watching. So many of the musculoskeletal, especially the crux of my discussion is directed towards atraumatic musculoskeletal pain. Please understand, I'm only talking about atraumatic musculoskeletal pain. Now these constitute a majority of the caseloads that we come across in our clinical practice. When there is a definitive trauma, you always identify a structure that could have been damaged, that needs to be protected, that needs to be healed, and therefore surgical intervention many a times has to be the option. But for most of the atraumatic musculoskeletal pain conditions, we cannot for sure identify a particular structure that is actually causing the pain. So when we do not identify the structure which is at fault, or most often when we are unable to do so, then how are we ever going to fix that pain unless we know where the pain is coming from? So the belief that pain can always be identified with clinical tests and imaging is one of the drivers of this too much of medicine. As I previously have already mentioned, see, for example, low back pain has a lifetime prevalence of about close to 90%, and shoulder pain has a lifetime prevalence of about close to 70%. And most often, 85 to 95% of the low back pain, or 85 to 95% of the shoulder pain, which is insidious in onset, which does not have a traumatic background to it, and we are not in a position to say that the imaging studies are correlating with the pain, because even 60 to 70% of the people in the age of 40 to 60 years show one or more of the radiological changes or imaging changes that can be diagnosed or put a diagnostic label as a underlying pathological condition, which is not the case. So when pain itself cannot be identified, but we tend to believe that pain can always be identified with clinical tests and imaging. Just to give a simple example, in case of a shoulder pain, a simple test like a Neer's test or a Hawking-Kennedy test is not going to isolate any particular structure. There may be 10 different structures in the shoulder that have the potential to cause the pain during that maneuver. So we cannot definitely conclusively rely on these so-called special tests that we use. And I can dare to say that these special tests are not special anymore. So we may call it as clinical tests that may be done, which can give us some direction as to what is happening around the shoulder. And definitively we cannot conclusively say that it is the rotator cuff tendons which are causing the pain. It could be the subacromial bursa as much, or it could be the subdeltoid bursa which is causing the pain, or it could be the bicipital tendon which could be causing the pain. So with this amount of uncertainty, especially when the clinical tests, most of the so-called special tests, when it has very poor validity and reliability, we don't have to rely overly on these special tests. And once identified, it is our belief that pain can be fixed, and the symptoms were caused by the underlying abnormalities what we have identified by the diagnostic imaging or the clinical test. When with these beliefs, when we try to treat, then that means we are delivering too much of medicine. The reason being, first and foremost, we are not sure if the structure identified on the imaging is actually the source of complaint or symptom. That is simply because the similar picture may be obtained in a person who is absolutely asymptomatic. How are we going to explain that situation? If we were to attribute someone's shoulder pain to a partial thickness tear that has been identified on an ultrasound, now how do you explain someone who has a much greater tear of his maybe supraspinatus, and he is doing fantastic even in terms of being able to do overhead activities? So let us not get into this habit of relying overly on the imaging. Similarly, as I previously mentioned, in the static posture and structure, we cannot, there is no correlation between the postural changes to the associated symptoms in most of the dynamic situations. So just mere observing a static posture of someone having a winging of scapula, or someone having upwardly rotated scapula or an anteriorly tilted scapula, does not necessarily mean that that is the cause of the pain that one has developed, especially if that has happened in an atraumatic manner. And also it is also the belief that if the abnormalities were not treated, it could we are risking further exacerbation or further tissue damage, is again a belief that we need to change. So we need to change the belief within ourselves as clinicians that many a times just waiting and watching could be a better strategy than doing something. Most often it is not possible to identify the exact structure by clinical tests, and special tests need not be always special. Please check on the reliability and validity of the test. Imaging, the findings on the imaging not necessarily always will correlate with the clinical symptoms. There is a very poor correlation, because there will be tons and tons of people whose imaging may be abnormal, but they are absolutely asymptomatic. And don't always presume or have the belief that the observation of your static posture automatically will correlate with the symptoms as it happens during a dynamic activity. So these belief systems need to be questioned to start with, and once you are convinced, it needs to be changed. Next. So many findings demonstrate a poor correlation of imaging findings with symptoms. This is what I've spoken about. And overuse of surgery. Now, there is no evidence to suggest that knee arthroscopy for knee osteoarthritis is a good thing to do, but we can day in and out see there are many procedures that are being done. And the subacromial decompression for a subacromial decompression and rotator cuff repair in case of a shoulder impingement syndrome or partial thickness rotator cuff tear, or again should not become the treatments of choice just based on few clinical tests or just based on the imaging studies, because the current evidence is for an graded exercise rehabilitation program can offer results or outcomes that are comparable with surgery at 1 year, 2 year, 5 year follow-ups. So why are we even believing that we are doing the second best thing after the surgeon? Let us all get out of the mindset that we need to get out of the mindset that we are only required to feast on the leftovers of the orthopedic surgery. No, we need to change our belief systems. We need to question, we need to ask for evidence. And for many atraumatic musculoskeletal conditions, the physiotherapist led exercise a graded exercise program with many other things, taking care of the psychosocial components can be as effective, and definitely it will not be like you're offering a second best treatment, but you're offering the best possible treatment. So surgical outcomes are comparable with exercise based rehabilitation is what many studies have proven for especially most of the atraumatic musculoskeletal pain conditions. So another problem is the overuse of opioids. So the efficacy of opioids for musculoskeletal pain management has been questionable for both acute and chronic conditions, but nevertheless has been used in epidemic proportions, mostly in the Western world. So providing education and advice along with the graded exercise rehab should become the cornerstone for managing most of the musculoskeletal pain conditions. Next. Can you please come back to the previous slide, sir? Previous. Yeah. See, the last point, providing education and advice, these should be the cornerstones. Now, many times, whether it is the general practitioner to whom the client might go first, or the consultant orthopedics to whom the client might subsequently go, it's been found that even in the most advanced countries where the health literacy is high, even in such society, such communities, it is only 20% of the clinicians who give some kind of an education or advice about the condition to the patients. So most often, the patient is not at the center of the healthcare. So that is something which we need to be aware of and ensure that we provide appropriate education and advice to all of our clients. Next. 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 So a lot many times, not all of us are always aware of the recent updates and the research in terms of what evidence is to be looked for, so that the clinical practice guidelines, which can inform our practice to change some of our belief systems and to uh, provide the best care for our patients. So to fill in these evidence to practice gaps, we always should look for the best practice guidelines through the guidelines which are diligently as a result of the systematic reviews, and which gives us the evidence of benefits and harms of alternative care options. And the clinical practice guidelines should be at the heart of making the decision making, should guide us about the standard of care for the best practice, and also should guide us in terms of allocation of the healthcare resources, ultimately all of which should result in better outcomes for our patients with lower costs. One third of the surgeries which are done for treatment of atraumatic musculoskeletal pain conditions are placebos. Now, this is what many of the orthopedic randomized control trials done by orthopedic surgeons have given us the results. So why do we need to wait for someone to decompress the acromion for us to rehab, wherein a direct rehab can give as much benefit in about 6 to 12 weeks? So this is a question that we need to ask. Next. So what are the best clinical practice guidelines for musculoskeletal practice? So care should be patient-centered, individual patient-centered to the context of the patient, to his individual context, where we use effective communication, and there has to be shared decision-making in terms of giving the various options that are available for the patients, and make him choose the options that best suit his needs and his context. And we should always, as practitioners, be in a position to screen our clients for serious pathologies and red flags. Get an insight into the psychosocial aspect of the patient, in terms of the carers that are available, the family support that one might get. Next, please. Next, please. Next. And what is the role of radiological imaging? The radiological imaging should be always discouraged unless serious pathology is suspected, which will happen through our screening of the red flags. There has to be an unsatisfactory response to conservative care or unexplained progression of signs and symptoms. And undertaking an MRI, it should be likely to change the management. Now these are the preconditions which should guide us for a referral for radiological imaging. Unless these conditions are met, we should discourage any form of radiological imaging. A recent study says that iatrogenic induced or recommended early MRI, even for people with radiculopathy, can worsen the outcomes. When not indicated, if you were to refer a person for an MRI, is more likely to have poorer outcomes. This is what one of the recent studies says. Can you please change? So we need to undertake a physical examination, which could include neurological testings, assessment of mobility, strength, and the progress should be evaluated, including the use of outcome measures. Outcome measures at the time of initial assessment and at the time of discharge are something that will add value to our practice. So patient education and information about their condition and the various management options. Now these are part of the education, advice, and the shared decision making that I earlier mentioned should become a standard practice for all of us. And provide management addressing physical activity and our exercises. We should rely less and less on many forms of passive interventions that we do in terms of electrotherapy, in terms of manual therapy, in terms of the various different soft tissue techniques and many things that we do for which we have very less evidence. However, the cornerstone of our care and treatment should be in terms of a graded exercise based rehabilitation, including a lot of physical activity. Next, please. So manual therapy will never be applied as a standalone treatment. It should be as an adjunct to other evidence-based treatments, as I just mentioned. And unless specifically indicated, which could be a red flag condition,
we need to have 10 minutes. 10 minutes left.
Surgical, an evidence-based non-surgical option should be the first line of treatment, and surgery has to be avoided. Only if things would not improve in 6 to 12 weeks, then you may contemplate on referring to a surgeon. And all of this should happen in a way that should facilitate the continuation or resumption of work. Just because anybody has a musculoskeletal pain condition, mostly of an atraumatic nature, we should not get him off his work. We should be in a position to enable or facilitate his continuation or resumption of work. Next, please. Next, please. So just to, as a single condition, what are the probable or the best clinical practice guidelines when treating osteoarthritis? Now, all of us know the primary osteoarthritis is insidious in onset, and there is definitely not a history of trauma. So does he have to undergo surgery? No. So what are the best clinical practice guidelines? So as much as possible, we should offer self-management programs. We should provide interventions targeting weight loss to people with OA who are often overweight or obese. We should not recommend any kind of supplements in terms of glucosamine or coordinating for disease. There is very poor evidence, or there is no evidence to suggest the use of that. And even a knee arthroscopic lavage and debridement, unless there is a rationale such as mechanical knee blocking, does not do any good other than being a placebo. So should not be encouraged. Okay, next, please. So here is my conclusion. So after going through the issues in terms of too much of medicine or medicalizing normality, and after going through the best practice clinical practice guidelines, what is that we need to do? We need to optimize and implement these recommendations, which is the next big challenge for all of us. And overcoming these challenges is up to us if we wish to take our profession to the next level. We started as masseurs to remedial gymnasts, and somewhere in between, people called us physiotherapy technicians. We aspired to become clinical physiotherapists, and we've reached now to become the gatekeepers of musculoskeletal system. And further, we only can look up to becoming specialist musculoskeletal physiotherapists or movement scientists. Now it's barely up to us to decide where we want to move or where we need to remain. And if we need to remain only to feast on the leftovers, we can do that. Or if we question ourselves, change our belief systems, and challenge the the suboptimal care, which does not put the patient at the heart of the healthcare, and don't evolve ourselves, then we are only us are to be blamed for the condition that we are going to be in. Thank you very much.